right, I'm Brian Baer. I'm a professor of Russian and Translation Studies here. I was hired in 1996 when we didn't have a master's track in Russian yet. So I was teaching undergraduate courses in language, culture, translation. And then after I arrived, Dr. Wakabayashi was hired, and in 2000 we began the offering the Russian and Japanese specializations in the master's program. And so I've taught in that, and then in the doctoral program since its inception.
Okay, so what do you know about how translator training was first introduced to Kent State? And what were the major elements of the curriculum in the early years?
Right. So, I mean, what I know from not only Dr. Shreve, but also from Christina Schaffner, my conversations with her, the program began when Dr. Shreve was on a one-year exchange at the University of Leipzig in Germany. And Kent was one of, I believe, our first exchange partner in Europe, and one of the strongest, most active exchanges at Kent State, and he went there on his sabbatical. He wasn't trained in translation, he was trained in anthropology, but he became very interested in what was going on there in the translation department, and it was indeed one of the more active and, in fact, innovative programs in Europe at the time, and they were in the lead of the so-called textual turn in translation studies. So they're integrating text linguistics into the study and teaching of translation. So people like Otto Kade, Albrecht Neubert, and at the time Christina Schaffner was, I believe, a graduate student when Greg was there. And Greg then invited, or the president of the university, Michael Schwartz, visited when Dr. Shreve was there, and according to the legend, was very impressed by the whole thing and told Greg, make me one of these. And then Greg designed the program with the help of the faculty at Leipzig. So I believe Albrecht Neubert and Christina Schaffner were some of the first visiting scholars. And in fact, I believe they were actually part of the hiring of the first faculty members. Certainly they played an instrumental role in designing the curriculum. And so, as I like to say, our program was actually born in Leipzig, and so we come out of an applied linguistics tradition, whereas many of the other translation programs in the United States come out of a comparative literature tradition. And so I think that has been our strength. We do certainly have people like myself who are involved in literary cultural translation, but it's left us open to, I think, a broader range of methodologies, certainly at the doctoral program. And so we have people here doing process-oriented research and corpus studies, etc. And it has allowed us in the master's program, I think, to react to market demand maybe a little quicker than some of the more literary-focused programs have. Well, I would say, again, we were aware that the few programs that existed in the U.S. were heavily literature-focused, so we thought we could offer a different perspective. Because we had a translation program, we had faculty working in a number of different languages with a number of different areas of specialization, so that we thought we were ready to offer something maybe that wasn't available at the time in the U.S. and certainly add to the programs available. I think Dr. Shreve anticipated that there would be more undergraduate and master's level training programs, and there wouldn't be anybody to teach in them, right, or to design them and run them. And so that was, I think, one of the major ideas behind the doctoral program, is that we would need people who, with higher degrees in, specifically in translation studies, translation pedagogy, etc., who could help build these and teach in these programs.
Okay. Can you share some of the arguments or problems during the discussion to fund the program, and how were they solved?
For the PhD?
For the PhD and for the PA programs.
It's a good question. For the BA programs, one of the debates that we continue to have today is whether it is accurate to call it a degree in translation. because usually with undergraduates, maybe they don't have the sufficient training to move right into industry with that degree, so they would require additional training. At the same time, we thought it was important to offer this to American students who didn't even know that this was an option, right? So that there are so few programs out there, not to name it translation might make it too obscure. People wouldn't know what it was. And so anyway, that's a debate we have. And so still today, most of our master's students don't come directly from an undergraduate program. Often they do a year or so in the profession or in the target culture and then come to the master's program. The PhD, we thought we would have two separate tracks initially. One more industry focused, more technology focused, and then it seemed that we didn't have enough people prepared to do that, and we kind of combined the two tracks after that. And but now we see every year the number of applicants to the PhD program increases, the quality of those applications increases, so I think the program is in a good place. But because there were so few programs, and we didn't know really what we would find. So some of it was Dr. Shreve's vision, and a lot of that was right, and some of that we couldn't anticipate in terms of the market and the academic market, etc. And so we then try to be flexible and react to what we're seeing.
Wow. So let's now talk about the founding of ATISA that took place, I think, in 2003 here at Kent. Can you tell us about the founding?
Yeah. Yes, so it was people working in translation, but for the most part, well, probably half of them worked in translation programs, the other half did not, but were working on translation in their research. But there were so few translation programs that they were finding a home in departments of English like Doug Robinson or other disciplinary niches. And so it came out of a growing sense that the American Translators Association, as a professional organization, wasn't able to maybe promote, wasn't the right home for those interested in translation research, and that we should have our own organization to give greater visibility to translation research. And so certainly we had representatives from the major programs at the time. Marilyn Geddes Rose from Binghamton University was there. Edwin Gensler from the University of Massachusetts Amherst was there. Claudia Angelelli, who was at the San Diego State University. Sonia Colina, who was at the University of Arizona, was there. I think that might have been all, but these were people who were working in translation. And if they didn't have an actual degree program, they were still teaching, either in certificate programs or isolated courses in translation, translation theory, interpreting, etc. Of Kent State faculty present, I remember it was certain Dr. Shreve, Dr. Wright, Dr. Kobe, myself, and Dr. Bell, I believe. That first meeting, each of us gave a paper based on our current research, a short paper that people then discussed, and then following lunch we started talking about what we saw as the future of the organization, what we wanted it to look like. We decided that we would sponsor a journal, which became TIS, or Translation Interpreting Studies. We started to develop bylaws and things like that, and basically agreed on how to proceed with getting the organization up and running. I don't know if it was at that time or a little later that University of Massachusetts Amherst agreed to hold our first open conference, and so in 2004 that conference happened. It was one of the larger ATISA conferences, a very successful conference that was held there.
Wow.
And I will note that our organization was initially ATSA, American Translation Studies Association, with the idea that, as many people in Europe do today, using translation to cover both translation, written, and interpreting. But with the strong, I guess, arguments from Claudia Angelelli at our meeting of the board at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst during that 2004 conference, it was voted to include interpreting in our title, and so ATSA then became ATISA. Yeah. Which actually gave our journal a very nice name, because Translation Interpreting Studies could be TIS, and so that worked out. Okay. But this remains, a point of contention in places where, many people, I think, largely in Europe, but I know other people in the States, Maria Tomoshko among them, believe that translation should be the umbrella term for everything. So we took a stand on that, I guess.
Okay, thank you. So speaking of the translator training history in the USA, in 2006 you wrote the following article, and I quote, "Until relatively recently, there were virtually no translation programs housed in the US. The question is, it has been roughly 10 years since you wrote that article, or that statement. So how much of an advancement has the training of translators made in the USA today?"
Mm-hmm. Well, we see this situation changing. Again, in somewhat unexpected ways, that we're seeing it change in a number of fronts. On the one hand, you see the very slow integration of translation into foreign language teaching. There was resistance to this for a long time, and for good reason. The communicative approach frowned on that, but we're seeing more sophisticated ways of integrating translation into foreign language. And that's coming slowly. We see world literature courses beginning, people teaching those courses beginning to talk about translation, what David Damrosch called the problematics of translation, that it's kind of an ethical imperative to talk about the fact that these are translations, not the original text itself. And so we see a lot of people beginning to incorporate translation or discussion of translation in individual courses on literature and culture. And then, of course, we're seeing degree programs, certificate programs, isolated courses on interpreting and translation cropping up all over the country. So I predict in another 5 years there'll be at least 2 more PhD programs.
How do you evaluate the role of the Institute of Applied Linguistics here at Kent in the training of translators over the last 10 years?
I think we're one of the more market-focused programs because of the way we came out of an applied linguistics tradition. We've always been focused on employability, and so when we see changes in the market, we try to react to that. I know several years ago when we saw that there were increasing number of job ads asking for editing and revision of translations. I developed a course in editing and revising for translators at the MA level, and it became a required course there. Of course, our technology lab is state-of-the-art, and so we pride ourselves on the employability of our students. And we've always had faculty members with very, very strong ties to the American Translators Association, certainly Dr. Wright and Dr. Kobe, and we've always had a booth there, and our master's students, the second years, prepare a resume to leave there, and company owners often come by and look at the resumes, and they like hiring our students because they are so industry ready when they come out of the program. And what's interesting to see is that the language industry is growing at such a rate that if, I don't know, 20 years ago you had to work in the field for many years to become a project manager, let's say you needed that experience. Now they're hiring our students right out of the gate because they need them so bad, and because we have a course in project management so that they know what's involved. But this has been really great, because if in the past some languages there was an ebb and flow in demand for certain language pairs, there are jobs now because management where there's a constant need that kind of compensates for any fluctuations in demand for a specific language pair. So that's been good for our students.
How do you, or what do you envision the future of the program to be?
I think a lot will depend on what we do now I think there are several big opportunities for us to make arguments for why translation should be integrated into other fields, for example, foreign language teaching, why other disciplines across the humanities and social sciences need to, for a variety of, I think, ethical and scholarly reasons, as I say, confront the fact of translation. So often many of these fields will use translation now as a kind of metaphor for any kind of cross-cultural communication or exchange, but I think it's really important to look at the actual translations to see what shifts are happening, what those tell us about the relationship between source and target cultures and the translator's role, etc. So I think there's an argument for us to make there. Certainly with the growing interest in world literature, and I think we have an argument to make about our role there. So there's a number of arguments we need to make as those adjacent disciplines grow, as programs and disciplines seek to become more transnational in their approach. I think we can help them do that. So yeah, and then in that sense, our success in making those arguments will to a certain extent determine our future. But so there's a part of our future which is very exciting because so many things are in flux that we can entirely envision the future. I also see that in terms of admitting new students, we need to admit students who don't necessarily come in with a prepackaged research based on what's already been done, but who are in a position to kind of imagine the future of our field. And so I think, you know, sometimes you guide students from ahead and sometimes you guide them from behind. And I think at this point we need more students who will envision the future of translation studies, and we help them make that future. A very exciting time, I think, to be in the field of translation studies, and at the same time as we try to shore ourselves up as an independent discipline, we need to be making the case for why we shouldn't be a separate discipline, but why many other fields need to, again, be confronting the fact of translation, be integrating this into their scholarship. And so yeah, it's an exciting place for us to be, and it's exciting that we don't know exactly what our future will be, but it can go in a lot of different directions, and so that's what's nice. I hope when people watch this 10 years from now, the translation has done some of that work, has been able to make the case that a lot of basically any discipline that deals with language, and certainly language across cultures, needs to deal with translation in a serious way.